That's faith. Whatever I'm doing, okay, I got to the point. I'm aware enough to go, it's not working. I'm exhausted. I don't give up. I still know what I want, but maybe there's another way to do it. When you hit that wall and you start running into doubt and fear, catastrophizing the future, whatever it is, shadow, more faith, grace, trust, and surrender.
Welcome to Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. Leadership today isn't accidental. It's intentional. It demands courage, compassion, and the ability to navigate a world defined by rapid technological change and evolving challenges. On this show, we go beyond the theory. We sit down with global leaders, executives, and visionaries who are actively shaping the future of business and security. We explore the deep water experiences, the hard lessons learned, and the practical strategies that separate true leaders from the rest. Whether you are navigating the C-suite or just beginning your journey, remember, we are all students of this discipline. Let's amplify your insights. Class is in session. Welcome to Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0. It's great to have you. So imagine the curtain rising on your biggest role. Spotlights are blazing, your voice filling the house, and then one quiet doctor's visit pulls the plug on everything. Adversity doesn't knock politely, it crashes in sometimes, rips away the script that you thought was yours, and leaves you on stage wondering who you are now. Today, we're walking that tightrope, but someone who's rewriting his scripts in real time. I'm extremely excited to welcome our guest today, Aaron Lazar, Broadway powerhouse, whose voice has electrified Phantom, the light in the piazza, and stages nationwide. A few years ago, Aaron was diagnosed with ALS, and since then, he's refused to disappear. He's hosting the Impossible Dream podcast. He's rallying science, spirit, and a sheer will to beat this thing. Aaron, thanks for being here, and we're just so excited to have this talk with you today.
Thanks for having me, David. Happy to be here.
So if you would just kind of give a quick background for our audience, kind of about who you are, and kind of we'll start taking it from there.
Actor, singer, turned keynote speaker, advocate, and host of the Impossible Dreams podcast, and really creator of the Impossible Dreams platform, which started with me keynote speaking on resilience in the face of adversity, and then became a Grammy-nominated album, the podcast. Now it's the Impossible Dream Machine. We're looking at ALS using AI and data science with top ALS clinicians in the world. I think we're headed towards a documentary film and a book. There's all kinds of creative projects happening, but they're all along the mission that I've had from the beginning, which is to help other people heal while I heal. We all help each other. We're not in this alone.
Adversity is something that could be profoundly disrupting. It's something that happens to individuals that creates confrontation in terms of loss, uncertainty, challenges behind some capacities that people actually realize they have. So I would just like, if we can, just kind of like take us back to when you first received that diagnosis, and what were those initial moments like for you?
I was 45. It's about just a little over 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago exactly. And just in fantastic shape, coming off the top of my career with leads in television series and Broadway national tours. And I was just sitting in a chair in my room, looked down, noticed my quads were twitching. Didn't look right. Googled it. ALS came up immediately. And that set me forth on a 9-month of hell, anxiety, insomnia, depression, what's going on, facing my own mortality. No really tools or skills for which to do that at all. Got the diagnosis. And then, voice within me said, I'm going to beat it. I don't know how. And I started on a healing journey that has really become the single most transformational time of my life, probably all the lifetimes that I've ever lived. And it's been an awakening. It's been an opportunity to turn an impossible circumstance into a real, chance to change myself in order to change my life. So, the diagnosis itself was what it is for anybody when a life crisis just shows up. You're not expecting it. Came out of nowhere, or so you think. And then I got to work, and here we are.
If you go back and kind of, look at where you were, like you said, adversity hits people in different ways. The magnitude is all dependent upon, one, the delivery of the news and kind of what it is. But as you kind of think back to when you first were faced with this concept, if you can recall, like, where did you first go?
The initial reaction was probably just as human as it is for anybody, just dealing with the emotions of, I can't believe this is happening to me. It's pretty sad and awful, but, I was in rehearsal for a musical, so I was going to work every day, which kept my mind off of the bad stuff. And I just had no idea what I was in for. ALS and motor neuron disease in general move so differently in everybody. It's one of the things we're looking at with the machine, is to try and understand why progression rates are so variable, why some people die very quickly, some people live for decades, some people are in between. And I don't know why, David, but within days, I just had a very clear gut voice within saying, get rid of fear. It's in your way. It's the first thing that's got to go, and get to work on healing yourself. And that journey has taken me on the most unexpected adventure of my life over the last 4 years.
That's a pretty amazing shift that soon. And I say that is because you probably know this, right? If you look at human psychology and development, the way we are able to manage and process emotions, our emotional programming that exists in our mental operating system, is rooted in adolescence. Like, how we learn to interpret other people's emotions, our emotions, and how we deal with those mindset shifts, are very, very well established in, how we're raised. So if you can you share some light in terms of how you think you were able to so quickly able to kind of embrace that loss of anchor of maybe some self-identity and move so quickly?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of a couple things. One, I really, I'd been living in some state of survival, fight or flight, lack of self-worth. I'm a failure despite all my success for probably a decade prior. And, there were a couple hellish points throughout that, a divorce that I didn't see coming, loss of identity from that, loss of financial identity, loss of the roles that I thought I identified myself with, husband, father, provider, Broadway star, whatever you want to call it. I had lost all of those, picked myself up, got them all back. It's not, not the husband part, but, got my career back, re-identified myself as a single father. Pandemic hit, got through that. And then these muscle twitches started. And when I started to lose my body and my sanity, those are the things I had not yet to lose. So now I was at a whole nother level of hell. And by the time the diagnosis came around, I just knew that this was not a path towards healing. So I was either going to spin further out and die, which I didn't want to do. I didn't have any interest in doing. I had the exact opposite. I was like, I want to live, but I can't keep living the way I've been living for 10 years. So I think part of it was an awareness of what I'd been doing up to that point. That programming was not going to get me through this. I think the other thing was, always have been sort of a very ambitious, incredibly, I guess you could say overachiever, wanting to be the best at whatever it is I do. And the irony is that I think you really need to lose belief in yourself, belief in God, and belief in life to open the doors for a crisis, whatever that crisis might be, to come into your life. But at that moment, I realized that I needed to believe in myself more than ever to get through it. So a resurgence of all this belief in myself and all of what's possible came back, and it felt like me. So I started to feel more like me in the immediate aftermath of the diagnosis than I had in a really long time. So I think it injected purpose into my life that I'd kind of been questioning or doubting for so long, and that however I'm wired, if I'm on purpose, I'm where I need to be.
That's a couple things. It's inspirational, one. But can you share? Because I think what people need to hear from you is a lot of people deal with varying states of adversity. Somebody in your case, it gets what's for all intents and purposes dependent upon, I think I read your site where there's 26 known cases where people were able to reverse ALS. It's the outlook is not as positive as what some people would deal with. Like, what do you attribute to the fact that, like, even some people that are faced with, divorce or financial economic strain, you name it, they collapse under that pressure. That emotional pressure fractures who they are. They have a split identity. It's very, very difficult and challenging. I mean, for someone like you, what do you attribute your ability to shift so quickly in such a positive direction? Because, Aaron, that's not common.
I wish I could say I know. A couple things. I mean, one, there are now 64 recognized reversals of ALS, alsreversals.org. Dr. Rick Bedlack at Duke University and Duke Health studies them, and that's why we brought him in as our chief consultant on the Impossible Dream Machine to study the reversals as part of our research to try and understand how people do it. How do you shift? I think, I just watched my Philadelphia Eagles lose 2 nights ago to the Chargers. And, you watch players after the game and they go, I give it all to God. I give it all to God. And I used to watch that and go, really, man, you're giving it all to God? Like, come on, you're working so hard. You're doing it. But like, throughout this entire journey of knowing myself, know thyself is, I think, the most important quote, maybe to follow of all time. This disease diagnosis, whatever, is a catalyst to know thyself. And I think whatever my soul is here to do just clicked right into like, okay, dude, the worst for you is now behind you. Ironically, despite the fact that, I've lost so much of my physical capabilities over the last 4 years. I mean, it took the first year and a half, 2 years before it really started to get bad. And the last 2 years have been absolutely awful. And there have been awful physical, like, how do you get through this physically? But the mental health aspect of it was the worst in the lead up to diagnosis. And when you break there, when you're, this I used to speak early on about how much of this journey is a journey into like understanding mental health. Because when you're in a state of anxiety or insomnia and depression, you cannot function. You just can't. And so I just kind of, I don't know, David, I just knew that if I was going to get through this, that wasn't the way to go. And a voice within me literally said, I can remember where I was, just, you got to get rid of the fear. And I started reading books. And I started making choices. I started to follow the path of awareness of thoughts, awareness of feelings, and awareness of actions, to look at the old code of the way I was doing things and start to make changes. And it's been 4 years of following that and continuing to make changes, which, ultimately led me to one of my deepest passions, which is consciousness-driven transformation. And I know you're a guy who specialized or specializes still in, helping people transform their lives. For me, elevating your consciousness to expand your limited sense of what is possible for yourself and your life is where this all begins. If you believe in box A that the only thing that's possible is this disease is going to take me from point A to point B, and you're a dead man, then your possibilities are limited. I opened it way up and said, I believe the body can heal from anything. Let's go on a ride. And it's been extraordinary, both in good and bad ways.
Yeah, so it's incredible, I think, how much you and I are aligned on certain things, and given the fact that we've never had an opportunity to talk. But one of the things that I have found through research and personal discovery is 90 to 95% of the people that walk this planet have no concept of self-awareness. The cognitive patterns, the emotional programs, the deeply seated beliefs that drive how you perceive the world, how you self-identify, the decisions you make, the behaviors, and then ultimately how that affects relationships. It's staggering that those many people, lack the self-awareness, and particularly of their mindset. And the fact that our code, like you say, is some terminology that I use, that we get this coding based on language, parents, and life experiences, and we learn to operate in that. And what I find fascinating is that you've almost been able to do like an extremely deep dive into yourself and to become immensely self-aware in terms of who you are. And what you're doing is incredible, because I'm telling you, it's not common. It took me years. I think I shared with you, I spent 30 plus years in the military. I got a master's in adult and continuing education. I've come from enlisted to officer. I was a presidential advisor, and it really wasn't until the last 5 years that I truly gained a lot of self-awareness. And like you, for many reasons, my marriage dissolved. I'm going through divorce. We have these situations that impact our lives that create this monumental pivot point upon which we change. It's difficult. So I want to tell you from a practitioner who's lived in the leadership trenches for years, like what you've done in such a short period of time is almost incredible. And it's a daily fight. And I know you know this. So I'd love to hear, and I think it would be great for listeners to hear, because I'm sure some folks wallow in their own self-pity, but that's not a place where we grow, and we can't stay there. It's not productive. You know this. So what have you done? Like, what's Aaron's daily routine? What is it that, besides being more anchored with God and who you are, like, how do you keep moving forward? What is it that serves as your motivation on a daily basis?
Well, thanks. I think it's an important question, and it's pretty awe-inspiring to hear that from you, David, because I live in the trenches, so I don't get reflect on it in a way necessarily, and it feels good to hear from somebody with your experience and expertise that I'm doing something right. But I think one of the things that was a big shift for me is like, I stopped really caring what other people think.
Amazing.
I remember I saw a healer, and I'll get back to your question in a second. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I saw an energy healer named Donnie Epstein pretty early on in my journey. A buddy of mine was making a documentary film on Donnie, and he was doing just incredibly trippy, mystical things with people in these big events. And I was like, well, what do I got to lose? I got to try everything that I could try. And I had, I worked with Donnie personally for a couple of days. He works with Tony Robbins. He works with some interesting people. And Donnie asked me a question. He said, are you more afraid of people not liking you or of death? And I was like, That's the dumbest question I've ever heard. Of course, I'm more afraid of death. Like, he goes, I don't think so. And that was 3 years ago. It took me probably 1.5 to 2 years after that before the light bulb went off of what that question really meant. So what do I mean by that? Well, you talked about how 90 to 95% of people have no awareness of the thoughts, feelings, actions, or energies with which they're living by. Those energies, those thoughts, those feelings, that is how we co-create our life with life itself, with God, with whatever you want to call infinite consciousness and creativity. That's not me. That's quantum physics. That's, the intersection of science and spirituality. That's truth that we're just not learned. We're not taught, so that, a guy like you can become a presidential advisor and go, holy shit, I think I'm just starting to figure out who I am from a self-awareness standpoint. We can achieve incredible levels of success, as Michael Gervais, a Finding Mastery, who I was, excited to have on my podcast. He said, the path of the hustle and the grind through, unconsciousness of how life works, the finer energies of life, that path of hustle and grind to success is the path of elite performance. But mastery of the self is very different than mastery of the craft. And I just knew at the diagnosis that I would have to master myself in order to change my destiny, right? And yeah, I became a nerd for this stuff. I became an incredibly passionate student of the mind-body connection. I think I always had been. I'd been studying it here and there for probably a decade prior, with no ability to get it or embody it, just was sort of intellectually turned on by it. It was more like a philosophical, curiosity of mine, a passion of mine to follow the Eckhart Tolles and Oprah's Spiritual Sundays and Joel Osteen's and whoever was out there kind of trying to be a voice and a torchbearer for expanded consciousness. But, when I went from that moment of, well, I got to get rid of fear in order to heal, how do I do that? The first thing I became aware of were certain thoughts that I was having all the time, certain emotions I was having all the time, and choices that I was making over and over again that were, as I would later learn from a guy like Sadhguru, your mind can either work for you or against you.
Yeah.
And so many people just have no awareness, as you said, that their mind is working against them all the time. We have a dream for what we want. We have where we are. And the gap between the two is this almost, insurmountable, canyon. Like, you got to just throw an Evel Knievel motorcycle over to try and get there, as opposed to going, all right, hold on. Instead of me trying to get there, what if I try and bring that thing to me? And how do I do that? Well, I have to fundamentally shift all of the things that are essentially creating that rift and creating that canyon. And I just began there. I read 100 books on healing in the nervous system by doctors and yogis and spiritual teachers and renowned scientists. And I tried to understand the technology of how I am responsible for creating my life, how I could have been responsible or partially responsible for opening the door to a disease like ALS, understanding the nervous system. As far as a daily practice, to go all the way back to your question, like you said, it's every day. It's every day. It's every day, as Rebecca Rosen likes to say, staying out of the light, staying out of the shadows, and staying in the light. The mind will constantly want to look at physical reality. I can't lift my arms or, get my hand, and go, you're a dead man. Like, that's what the mind wants to do. And old code programming is, I got to believe everything that I see, and that's reality. No, reality is what you expand your consciousness to believe to be true. The body and the mind and life itself respond to who you are, not what you want. So if who you are is somebody deathly afraid of dying, and you're unable to rise above or out of the physical 3D, well, this must be real because my body's doing this, then you create a life within those limitations, if that makes sense. So I knew I needed to change my beliefs and my perspectives on what was possible. And I think I already had within me a sort of, I've got a little statue of Don Quixote back there.
Yeah, I see him there.
The impossible dream.
Yeah.
A guy who, at least in the musical, the book could be more controversial, but the musical is where it started for me. That is a knight on a quest to change the world through unwavering idealism. And, it was breaking away from anything that felt like somebody would tell me, well, that's not possible or that's not possible. It's like, you don't get to tell me that. I get to decide for myself. So it's a practice daily, whether it's meditation, connecting with my higher self at least once a day for 20 to 30 minutes, getting out in nature, staying in the light and out of the shadows is staying in love and not fear, surrounding myself with, the love of my life who I found, we found each other just 14, 15 months ago in the middle of hell. Where did that miracle come from? Raising my kids to see this as an opportunity, not an ending, to see it as a beginning and not an ending. And, that's not necessarily easy with two teenage boys. And I've got two of the strongest, greatest kids. You can go to my Instagram and see conversations with them where these kids are speaking from a place of emotional intelligence that I didn't have until I was 48 years old. So it's that, it's, and I like to say when I travel and speak, there's no three magic like bullet points here. Whatever works for me might not work for somebody else, but it's the questions, right? That are, well, then the question is, if I'm somebody else, well, this is working for this guy. Does that resonate with me and will it work for me? And if it doesn't, what will work for me? Because I promise if you ask the questions, if you go on the search, if you have the courage, there's a Kabbalistic teaching that the Red Sea did not part because Moses put his staff down and raised his arms. The Red Sea did not part until the first Israelite had the courage to step into the water. And you kind of have to do that. Yeah. Like you gotta have the balls to go for it, man.
That takes, as you know, that takes an enormous amount of courage and willingness to be vulnerable. And I really love how you talk about like living in the mind, because as you know, as you're dealing with this in science and research on the brain, research is showing that our brain does projections in reality. Like what we think we truly believe is our echoes of different things. Like most people think that, hey, I see something, it makes me afraid, I react. But the brain actually reinterprets those things different times. The brain projects, and, we really get used to living the reality of the lies that our brain tells us.
Well, I mean, I would love to hear from you about your experience sort of, teaching things around that, either as a presidential advisor or as, a leader in the military, because that's fascinating to me, right? I mean, everybody, as you said, has their own adversity, but I could never imagine the adversity of defending this country, the way that you have to prepare your mind for something like that, or running this country. And, is there anything you can share about how that sort of applies to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that the application is, you kind of nailed it. So as I grew up in the military at different levels, worked, at the highest levels of the Pentagon and worked on some presidential policy and actually drove a new national level policy. What I became very aware of is the fact that individuals needed me to challenge assumptions, to challenge frameworks, and to truly kind of give them a good understanding of things from a different perspective. And what I always endeavored to do, and I did this before I realized I was doing it, but now it's become like a deliberate practice and something that I help people with, is we are own prisoners of our own experience and of our minds. And you probably know this. I don't know if you read Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about two types of brain. The first type of brain is basically the intuitive side of the brain. That's basically when you're exposed to an experience that all of a sudden, and you probably know this, the way our brain works is it receives sensory data. Your thalamus operates with other components of the brain to do memory recall. And then you've already had this predetermined pathway of the decision because of experiences. And so what I found is in many areas, that's the way people think. And then if you look at Kahneman's type 2 brain, that's the analytic brain. And as you know, the brain wants us to be lazy. It wants the path of least resistance. Why? Because its two main functions are minimize threat, maximize reward. So I found just having to work with senior leaders across the globe to make sure that they understood that, your brain is like, imagine you're standing in front of a filing cabinet. The easiest thing to do is reach up to the top drawer, open it, pick something out, and okay, that's what it is. But in order to say we've got to take this example and we have to make sure that the assumptions that we're making about this specific situation is still, conducive to what we want. Is the problem the same? How we frame it? And it's all based on how our mental operating system frames things for us. And trying to get them to, I like what you said earlier, is people say, well, don't think, I want to think outside of the box. I'm like, well, don't put yourself in the box. Because if you put yourself in the box, then you got to worry about the box. And I used to do a drill with students, and I would put up a drawing on a board, and tactically, right? Point A to point B, there'd be mountains, and the students would be like, oh, we can only go two different directions. And I'm like, okay, what if we get rid of the terrain on the board? Just let's say how could we go from point A to point B? And the amount of potential solutions that they would come up with was staggering. And I'm like, okay, now that we have these 50 things that we think we can do, now let's impose the limitations on it to see what now doesn't work. And that kind of concept worked at the very strategic levels because, you start talking about political appointees and folks that have made it up to, like multi-star generals or senior leaders in the military. They're great people, but a lot of times they fail that they've been institutionalized by the organization which they're a part of. Mm-hmm. And they can't see and they don't understand what they don't know. And having somebody there to be a thought partner and kind of show them, examples. And I remember I was in a room with Undersecretary of Defense when we were dealing with the Ebola crisis in Africa, where we had UN peacekeepers. And I had a piece of paper and I said, hey, what do you see here? I wrote 10 multiplication equations and I made number 5 wrong. I'm like, what do you see there? Oh, number 5's wrong. I asked a couple other people, what do you see there? Number 5's wrong. I said, why can't we say we got 90% instead of we got one wrong? Because our brains are programmed to look for the negative. It's all rooted in adolescent emotional programming. And a lot of times people just don't understand what that is. And once you can liberate yourself from that scaffolding, it's incredible. And that's why I'm saying for you, for where you're at this place in time, what you've been able to do for yourself is something that I spent years in service and advising at the highest levels that people couldn't do. Now, science would also say that, Aaron had this amazingly impactful, event that took place that could potentially fracture his sense of self. And, I love football like you do, and I would throw the BS flag. I'm like, well, no, I can give you situations where something wasn't that extreme that it didn't happen.
I mean, there's so much to talk about here. Working backwards, if anything, it didn't fracture my sense of self. It catalyzed the remembering of my true self, and my sense of self had been fractured like I said, for a decade prior, if not longer, by consistently trying to operate within limitations that never felt good. And I always felt in conflict with myself about who I was or what I was trying to do. This was an opportunity for me to completely reinvent myself, which, again, okay, scary, but how far are you really going to go? I read stories about people who've healed and cured themselves of diseases and, go down to South America and live in a convent for a year and a half and come back. Their hair has, returned to its color. They look so different. They've lost weight that they go home. People don't even recognize who they are, and they change their name and they start a whole new life. Okay, well, I guess that's one, level of where this could go. I never really felt like that was going to happen to me. I've just remembered who I really am. And I don't think it's any different from who you are, David. I don't think it's any different from who those 5-star generals are, or, the folks at your local grocery store. We're all divine sparks, and we create a limited narrative for who we are and what our life is. And then, like you said, make our choices based on that, almost on autopilot. And when you do that, somebody asked me on a podcast the other day, do you think that you would have become who you are now without ALS? And it's an important question, because I say at the end of some of the speeches that I give, I wish I could have learned all this without ALS. Maybe you can. Why? Implication being, why is pain and suffering, crisis and adversity, the quote unquote only way that humans grow?
Yeah, amen.
And why does it have to be that way? And so I am super excited by the reality that it doesn't have to be that way, that my kids are getting a different experience, and that through conversations like this with you, through the podcast where I get to have conversations with people who've lived all kinds of impossible dreams to empower audiences to live their own impossible, we get to flip the script on that bias that the brain has to see the 1 in 10 math problem that's wrong and not see the other 9 that are right. And that takes me back to something you said earlier about, the brain wants to be lazy and maximize pleasure and minimize risk. Or maximize reward, minimize risk, maximize reward, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
I actually don't know that that's so bad, because I lived from the opposite. I was maximizing risk and minimizing reward all the time, from a place of, no matter what I do, it's not good enough. No matter how many Broadway shows or how many TV shows or how many movies, it's not enough. I'm not enough. I made life harder in every situation in order to give myself a sense of accomplishment subconsciously. I don't even think I was aware of the programming. I would agree with you that started way young. I was an overachiever and I got used to overachieving. So I was, if I was in between Broadway shows and hustling and grinding as an actor, feeling helpless and like my career was out of my control, I would maximize my ability to control my body, working out like a madman. And I would, I would be the hardest working unemployed guy in show business, because I had to hold my head up high, surrounded by my friends, doctors, lawyers, bankers, whatever it was. That is such a limited, like you said, that is the terrain on that map. That is the life that most of us are born into, raised into, and taught to believe is just how it is and what's possible. So I put that to the test with ALS and said, no, I'm interested in, I'm interested in flipping the script in every way possible. And so you're talking about the 5-star generals, and some of the brass leaders who, were limited in their thinking. it's no different, right, than the medical system. That the doctors you go to when you get a disease, they have their paradigm. They have the map that's in front of them and the map that they play on, and here's what's possible on it, and here's not. And I went, why? Why? I just dared to ask why, and then followed it up for myself with, well, they want to say that a person with ALS, most likely you got 3 to 5 years to live. You better get your affairs in order. Okay, well, I've had symptoms for almost 5 years. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Why do some people live with it for 20 and some people die very quickly? And then that leads to you're in a doctor's office being told you got 3 to 5 years to live. There's something off, right? There's room for hope. And there's room for scientifically validated hope. And so I'm just in awe of the God called with this thing, and I'm just trying to answer. And I'm in awe of how it keeps expanding and expanding to give me more and more opportunities to end up in conversations with people I've never met. We met, 45 minutes ago. And yet here we are, both in our own ways, as torchbearers for expanding what's possible for people, opening their minds to another way of doing things. And without getting too woo-woo about it, I mean, Eckhart Tolle wrote a book called A New Earth maybe 15, 20 years ago. I had no idea what that meant. But over the last week, I've heard old earth ways of doing things is pain, suffering, hustle, grind, limitation, this, that. A new earth is hope, belief, faith, trust, surrender, strength in surrender is the name of a book that a buddy of mine wrote. He's got 6 Guinness World Records named Matt Dawson. Like, it's a whole different thing that I didn't know was possible when I was growing up. And I'm teaching it to my kids now. And in that way, we expand what's possible for the next generation.
I think you kind of perfectly summed up like the challenges I think we face at the global level, because it's different for different cultures. In that there's 2 forces in motion. One of them being the fact that the majority of people have no to limited understanding of their mental operating system. And then in institutions, it could be military service, it could be academia, it could be the medical service. They are all taught and institutionalized by the institution. We have these medical standards. This is what you have to follow. And it truly, and I like your parallel to my terrain relationship in terms of it absolutely constrains creativity. It absolutely prevents people from seeing what is possible. And that was the whole point of some of the drills that I did was, let's see what's possible before we try to determine what's not possible, because you're backwards. And we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm inspired by your ability. And I'm a very, very faithful man myself, and I believe that God puts people in places for a reason. He gives us talents, and we are basically products of all that. So I just think it's inspirational. I would, I know you're a busy man, but I would love to stay connected with you. I think we could build some serious synergy together. I think we have a lot of concepts. We won't tell a lot of people. We're both from New Jersey, but it's incredible, the opportunities in that you get to meet people in the world, and it's such a pleasure. And your approach to the power of the mind, and you probably know this, I think it goes back to like 2004 and 2014. One at the Cleveland Clinic and one in Ohio State, where people actually grew muscle mass by mentally imagining flexing muscles, and people in casts that, couldn't do workouts. And I mean, there's bona fide science that suggests that mental imagery can change things. And that's where you're at. And that's where you're living proof that's going to happen.
Amen. Thank you. I mean, I agree. I'd love to keep talking, because I'm inspired, because I live in this bubble where, I'm applying whatever I can daily to ALS, neurodegenerative disease, consciousness driven transformation, but it's beyond inspiring to hear from you that this is what's going on behind closed doors in the Pentagon, and that you're able to make change on a level that affects national security of all of us. Like, that to me speaks to the sort of universal power of this wisdom. And to me, the wisdom is very simple. It's, as you said, most people aren't aware of the power of their mind. Well, if you're not aware of the power of your mind, then you're not aware of the power that you have in and the responsibility and accountability that you have in creating the life that you're living.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to boil down what I'm most passionate about, right, is, inspiring other people to at least wake up to the possibility that they are infinitely more powerful than they've ever given themselves credit to be. And all they got to do is start to wake up a little bit. I don't think it's controversial. I don't think it's dangerous. I think it helps us live better, kinder, more peaceful lives. I don't know. It's something that I'm so honored to share with people whenever I can. And it does make change. If I think about the doctors that from early diagnosis days with, a particular physician who was, about to retire and very, no bedside manner around this, tough job, right? Your job is to tell somebody they've got ALS as part of your job. Like that sucks, but that's your job. Can't you find ways to do that, provide a little hope, a little empathy, a little sensitivity, a little kindness, a little warmth, a little whatever it is. And, I've since met and worked with, most, if not all of the top ALS docs in the country and some in the world. And to their credit, I have enjoyed how their minds are opening, not just because of conversations that we're having, but because of conversations that they're having and have been having as a community to break down the silos of how ALS has been looked at. Let's find one pill that's going to fix it. Well, actually, no, more like cancer. It might be a lot of different things. And you might need a lot of different things and a lot of different people, a lot of different disciplines to work together on this. Well, the ALS community is working together, man. I mean, we've got, a couple of the top ALS docs in the country consulting on the machine, working with data science, AI. And that's representative of global prizes like the Longitude Prize out of the UK, where over a dozen ALS organizations are offering their data open source for teams to come in, look at it, and see what they can find using artificial intelligence to help progress ALS research and ALS cures. I think the world is coming around to maybe what you and I are putting out there. I would sort of ask you this question, like, do you see progress being made in your field? Because I'm really hopeful that the more we just have conversations like this and say to people, look, man, if it resonates as truthful for you, then just explore it a little bit, see where the breadcrumbs lead. And if it doesn't, maybe it's not time, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. I was talking to a physicist, and I kind of explained to him kind of like how my philosophy is in like people development. He's like, Dave, you're a singularity. And I said, I'm going to be like one of those airbenders, right? That bends the Enterprise around me. He kind of laughed. But, in all seriousness, I think you and I are kind of like singularities. And I think there's a lot of people out there that want to change and are really kind of searching for the opportunity to figure out, how to gain capacity. But I've come to realize that there's kind of two main camps in the world. It's folks that like have really deep experiences in something. using myself as an example, deep experiences in military leadership and leading and developing organizations. And then there's folks that are like really academic in nature, but there are not very many people that bridge that gap, that have the academic, and what I hear from you is just like an amazing curiosity based on humility to learn. With those experiences, you put those two, overlap those two things, and it's just extremely, extremely powerful. So while there's other folks out there, I think I would argue that folks like you and I are a little bit different, and we learn to see what the possibilities are, and we try not to constrain our minds on certain things. And it's just the way we kind of view the world. And one of my favorite quotes that I've used for many years was from John Archibald Wheeler. He was a physicist, and he said, "As the island of our ignorance grows, so does the shores of our, as the island of our knowledge grows, so do the shores of our ignorance." So the more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. And some people stop there, and they're comfortable being on their island. But guys like you and I, we're not. We want to break the mold. We want to help show the world what's the potential. By revealing the mindset is what holds you back. Learn your brain, learn those models, learn that coding, because guess what? You have agency. And I talked to a guy last week, and I said, autonomy is coming. So we as human beings have agency. We get to choose. And you start talking about happiness and joy. It's a choice. It boils down. It's a bottom line choice. I said, would you feel comfortable if I stuck you in an autonomous vehicle and put you on the road and to tell you that, hey, this thing may get out of control? And guess what? It does go out of control. He's like, I would not like that. I said, but that's what you're currently doing, because you're existing in a state where you're a passenger in life because you don't know your system that operates. You have agency to not to manipulate it, but to evolve it. And that's where the choice lies.
That's huge, Dave. I couldn't agree more. I think there's so many different ways to put that. I had a teacher who once said to me, the more you know, you don't know shit.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the layers of the onion that are life keep peeling back. And I'm at the place where I realized for myself, I believe there's no limit, that the layers are infinite. I used to think, as soon as I get to this thing, I'll have figured it out. And as soon as I figure it out, it'll all be better and it'll all make sense. And it's like, well, it gets better and better and better, but it also just keeps going. And I think it keeps going, like you said, in direct proportion to your curiosity and courage.
Yes.
And every time I've come up against a mental limitation, that's like, you know what? Maybe it would just be easier to pull the plug on this, man. How much more of my body am I going to be okay with not being able to use?
Yeah.
Every time life has opened up in another way that has surprised me, presented me with miracles, presented me with light instead of shadow. And that, as you said 20 minutes ago in this conversation, it's a practice. It's not, it's like, how do we do it? You got to practice doing it. And the more you practice, the better you're going to get at it. And with regards to, I think your last comment about, autonomy. This is another Michael Gervais quote, but he said, when you're up against something unreasonable, you have to be unreasonable. And it's unreasonable. He said, Aaron, it's unreasonable for you to think that you can do what you're trying to do. He said, but why not you? And that's what I say to other people. Whatever it is you're trying to do that feels unreasonable to you, why not you?
Yeah, but I also like to say that our faith walks hand in hand with doubt. And that keeps us moving, in a faithful sense.
Yeah, I think doubt is, the way I my perspective on it that keeps me in the light and out of the shadows, of which doubt is a shadow, is that, look, doubt's just a natural part of being a human being, and it's part of the programming. Like you said, 10% of that thing's wrong. I don't see the 90% that's right. That's the same thing with doubt. I see the problems in front of me, the brain's biased towards negativity, whatever that is. That's just part of being human. But the more we practice other, the less that becomes true for the masses. Change starts with you. You have to be the change that you want to see in the world. And then guys like you and I have this conversation, and I don't care if only one other person listening today has the light bulb go off. Great. I've spoken for audiences as small as, a living room of people and as big as thousands of people in a stadium. If one person, tells me this had an impact on me, right? Mission accomplished. This autonomy, it really does come from a mind shift. And the last thing I'll say about that is, Sadhguru has a quote that is like, we humans have the most sophisticated physical vessel of any animal, of any living thing on the planet. And nobody takes time to read the instruction manual.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah. So amazing. I mean, you touched on certainty, and I've always believed that certainty is the enemy of unity, of self. The minute we become certain of something, the minute we've kind of lost a bit, because that's
so interesting. I like that.
That kind of divides us. If you think you're certain about something, then you've actually just closed doors. You remain uncertain. You could be confident, and I am extremely confident in who I am. You're extremely confident in who you are. But we constantly challenge ourselves. We constantly challenge our emotions, our thoughts. In the moment that we think, yeah, I got this, then maybe you don't anymore.
And I think that's a huge point for people dealing with whether it's illness or I guess any adversity. I mean, when I got to the point where, and I remember when it was almost a year ago, and I was so exhausted by the daily work at the time to mind over matter this whole thing. I'm going to wake up, and no matter what I'm dealing with, I am going to get in the walker and I'm going to try and walk. I'm going to try and physically mind over matter. I'm going to willpower and effort my way out of this. And it just wasn't working, Dave. Like, it was not working. It would work for a time. I'd have a peak of success, and then I'd bottom out, and, I'd go, what's going on here? And it was so exhausting for my mind. And someone said to me, surrender. And I was like, oh, well, 3 years ago, when told me somebody with MS told me 3 years ago, surrender. And I was like, I'll never surrender. Surrender didn't mean capitulate this time when I heard it a year ago.
Right.
It meant let go of needing to control the moment, and let room for, as you said, faith and doubt go hand in hand. Let room for faith to flood in. Let room for God to flood in, because that's infinite possibility. God is, let's remove the terrain. Anything's possible. And then let's reverse engineer that thing. That's faith. That whatever I'm doing, okay, I got to the point. I'm aware enough to go, it's not working. I'm exhausted. I don't give up. I still know what I want, but maybe there's another way to do it. And surrender and faith and trust. So that's another thing for people listening, looking for a part of the daily practice. When you hit that wall and you start running into doubt and fear and catastrophizing the future, whatever it is, shadow, more faith, grace, trust, and surrender. Just how can I embody more of those things? Ask yourself the question and then just wait.
Amen to that.
And it will come.
Wow, this has been amazing, Aaron. I'm so thankful for you joining us. I think I'll use your words. You're an amazing spark in this world. You have a purpose. God has given you a purpose. You are a beacon of hope in a lot of things. And I just maybe you've been told that before, but like from my perspective and how I view mindset change and all that, you're an extreme breath of fresh air. People need to listen to you, because, it's easy for me to kind of advise politicians or advise CEOs about unleashing the power of the mind before you can change organizations. Organizational transformation has to occur through people. But, I could say, hey, you guys, if you think you're having a bad day, go watch the Amplified podcast with Aaron Lazar. Go watch his Impossible Dream podcast. And if you think that you're having a bad day or you think you want to simmer in your wallows, just go get a different perspective. So I'm immensely grateful for having you on here. And before we wrap up, tell everybody where they can find you, how they can support your work, and more importantly, how do they get involved in helping your cause?
Thanks, Dave. And thanks for having me on. I think, the spark thing is beautiful because I've been saying, for a long time, we don't do any of this alone. We help each other heal, and that's lighting up each other's sparks, right? The God spark, that just whatever that fire is within you. And you can't sometimes do that by yourself. And that's why this podcast is out there, because it'll light somebody's spark up today who's listening to this. And that's an honor for me. That's one of the greatest gifts other than being a father. The greatest work I can do in service is to help other people do that. So, if people want to follow and check it out, the podcast is called Impossible Dreams on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. My website, aaronlazar.com, has links to everything also. As far as keynote speaking and stuff, you can book me there. Instagram is the other way to go. Aaron Scott Lazar, Aaron, Aaron Scott Lazar is my Instagram. And I appreciate, people subscribing, following. And there's a merch shop for The Impossible Dream. The logo is actually behind me, but it's a little blown out in the sun right now. But we've got some really inspired merch. I don't know if you can see it, but the logo is the cross of Christ, the sword of Don Quixote, and the third eye of awakening to represent rebirth, courage, enlightenment, knowledge, and the hilt of the sword is actually the Kundalini snake of transformation. So, you can always go to the shop, buy a very expensive sweatshirt for like $40 or $50 or something, but that money helps us keep the podcast going. And also, it has the mantra on there of live your impossible. So it'll hopefully inspire people as we head into the holidays and the new year. Not sure when this is airing, but, to just stay in faith and keep moving in the direction that you want things to go, and get your mind working for you, not against you.
All right. Thanks for that. We'll be sure to make sure that we also help message what you do and where you're at. And so for all the listeners today on the Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0, thanks for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0. We've talked about the theory and the experiences, but remember, the strongest leaders don't just listen, they act. If you are looking to elevate your executive presence, navigate complex organizational challenges, or build a resilient culture within your own team, you don't have to do it alone. At Apogee Global RMS, our strategy and leader development practice is designed to help you bridge the gap between where you are and where you need to be. Visit us at apogeeglobalrms.io to learn more about our leadership solutions. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn to keep this conversation going. Until next time, keep learning, keep leading, and stay amplified.